philosophers were trying hard to define precisely what this state of being was. The phrase state of being may be a little confusing, but if you think about it, I think you can figure out that just means happiness. He triggered a revolution in happiness, and Greek philosophers were trying to define what happiness was. Some Greek philosophers, of course, some contended that it sprang from hedonism. There's a word you may or may not be familiar with, hedonism. Now, one of the first things that really conscientious students would do is grab their dictionary and look up hedonism if they aren't familiar with the word. But I would like to suggest a different strategy. Don't stop and every time you bump into a word you don't know, don't look it up. See if you can figure out what it means. Sometimes you can figure it out if you just keep reading. And in this case, what you'll find is that in the very next phrase, he explains what hedonism is. Hedonism, the pursuit of sensual pleasure. Oh, that's what it is. Hedonism is eat, drink, and be merry, and so forth. So that's what some philosophers were contending that where did happiness come from? It came from hedonism, from enjoying sensual pleasure. All right, some philosophers thought that. And then he says, but other philosophers, argued from the perspective of tragedy. Tragedy. Wonder what he means by that. Now, I bet you were thinking, oh, tragedy, something sad. Tragedy is when things go badly, when there's pandemics, for example, or terrorist attacks on 9/11. That's a tragedy. It's a tragedy when someone dies early and so forth. So is that what he means? That's the general meaning of the word tragedy. But remember, we're still talking about 2,500 years ago. We're still talking about the age of Aristotle, ancient Greece. And if you know a little bit about ancient Greece, you know that in ancient Greece, it was a society that really believed, it's where drama was invented. And there were two kinds of dramas that the Greeks loved. One kind was called comedy, and the other kind was called tragedy. And in tragedy, the main character always died at the end of the play. And that's what made it a tragedy. And so, what we know now in this sentence is that other philosophers argued from the perspective of tragic drama. They believed happiness to be a goal, a final destination that made the drudgery of life worthwhile. What made it worthwhile was we would get our reward at the end. It was the goal of life, was we might suffer a lot and have to work hard and so forth all through life, but in the end, there will be a reward for us. And these ideas are still with us today, he says, in the decadence of Instagram and the gourmet burger culture. That's a really, I don't know what that phrase means. In the decadence, let's make that one green. In the decadence of Instagram and gourmet burger culture. That's gourmet burger culture sounds like rich people who don't just eat hamburgers, they eat gourmet burgers. But I don't understand the decadence of Instagram. But I've never been on Instagram. Maybe in class on Tuesday, one of you can explain to me what's decadent about Instagram. But that's one place. It says these ideas that life is full of drudgery, but in the end, you'll get your reward in the end. Those ideas are still with us today in whatever that green passage, the decadence of Instagram and gourmet burger culture means. But also he gives another option, also in the Christian notion of heaven. Okay, so that's pretty much that's pretty self-explanatory. We know whether we're Christians or not, whether we believe in it or not, most people understand the concept of heaven. And the concept that heaven is your reward after the end of a life of drudgery. So those were the two views of Greek philosophers. when Aristotle came along. Either you could believe in hedonism and live a life of sensual pleasure, or you could believe in leading a life that would lead to a reward after you die. Those were the two philosophic positions in ancient Greek. And now comes a crucial sentence. But Aristotle proposed a third option. In his Nicomachean Ethics. Nicomachean Ethics is a document that that survived after he died, and his son, who was Nicomachus, hence the name of this book, actually found it and wrote it down based on the teaching of his father. So it's called Nicomachean Ethics. And we're going to read it. That's going to be the next reading in this course. We're going to read a little ancient Greek philosophy, only about a page. It's not a lot of it. But in that book, Aristotle described the idea of eudaimonic happiness. Now, I know you don't know that word. I didn't know that word until I read this article. But I want you to remember it. It's going to be important in this article, and in later articles in the course, other people are going to refer to this. So I want you to do is try to figure out. There's the hedonistic attitude towards happiness. There's the Christian notion of happiness in the next life. And then there's this idea of eudaimonic happiness. And when you're reading the rest of this article for Tuesday, that's going to be a central question. Make sure, work hard to try to understand what is meant by that phrase. And it's some of the explanation is right in the same sentence. Eudaimonic happiness said that happiness is not merely a feeling, that's the hedonistic attitude, or a golden promise, that's the Christian attitude, but it's a practice. A practice. Well, what does that word mean? Well, think about a doctor who has a practice, that is, he has patients and an office and somewhere. It's sort of like that, I think, is what he means. It's something you do. You practice what you believe in. It's something like that. And another philosopher, Helen Morales, says that a eudaimonic happiness is living in a way that fulfills our purpose. Well, that helps some, but how do we know what our purpose is? And then Morales apparently goes on to say, Aristotle was saying that it's flourishing. Stop hoping for happiness tomorrow. Happiness is being engaged in the process. Happiness is being engaged in the process of life. And now, thousands of years later, evidence that Aristotle may have been onto something has been detected in the most surprising of places, the human genome. Where's that? Remember, that's the double helix. That's where our chromosomes are, our genes are. And in fact, what Shore is going to, what's his first name? Will Shore is going to argue is that science has discovered that seeking happiness the way Aristotle wants you to will make you have a healthier life. Wow. So, I hope that helps set this article up for you so that it's a little easier to approach. Remember that this blue phrase, eudaimonic happiness, is what we're going to try to understand. There's another phrase, he used it earlier, I think, but certainly he's going to use it several times more in the paper, and it's the idea of living the good life. So you might want to watch for that phrase and try to figure out what does Will Shore mean by the good life? What could that mean? So there's a little introduction. I hope do the best you can on this. Recognize that it's not an easy reading, and but especially focus on those two terms, eudaimonic happiness and the good life, and see if you can figure out what it is that Will Shore means by those phrases. Have a good weekend. Don't let this tough reading assignment wreck your weekend.